It was Origen who first taught this doctrine that God and man are logically completely separate. In fact, Origen himself said that God, he took this concept of ousia, and he said that God actually has no kind of nature. He took it to an extreme. He said there is no nature to God. He is beyond all classification and category. Man can be categorized, but God cannot. Of course, this doctrine is completely unbiblical. That is simply not how the Bible presents God. The only passage in the Bible that talks about the nature of God by nature is Galatians 4 verse 8. The interesting thing about this particular scripture is that this is a distinguishing between God and the idols. It is situated in such a context that it shows the similarity between God and man and the dissimilarity between God and the idols. That's the only scripture in the entire Bible that talks about God by nature. And He is not by nature something made by human hands. He is God and man is in His image. So this theme of God by nature and man never being able to become God, that's nowhere in the Bible. In fact, the exact opposite doctrine has always been taught in the Scriptures. In every single instance in the Bible, we note that the common theme in the Bible is to distinguish in a way that always emphasizes the similarity of man and God in contrast to the similarity of God and the idols. This is so fascinating how this works because, well, we can see it in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 27 and 28. Moses states that the Lord would scatter Israel among the nations, where they will serve the gods and the works of man's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. Paul specifically contrasts the similarity of man and God with the dissimilarity of the God and the idols. This is so important, and Paul especially is strong in this in Acts 17 verse 29. Paul specifically shows this contrast. He says, For as much then as we are the offspring of God, he's talking to his audience, we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold and silver and stone graven by art and man's device. You see how this works? It's often said by classical theists that a man cannot have God's nature any more than a dog can have man's nature. But this is directly contradictory of the biblical statements in Genesis chapter 1 even. It says man is made in God's image and in God's likeness. So here we have that classical theism teaches another very interesting paradoxical dichotomy. And this is so fascinating. On the one hand, the classical theists will propose that man in some vague way is similar to God, and yet on the other hand, they can have absolutely nothing in similar whatsoever. It's a fascinating dichotomy from the Christian viewpoint. We LDS, we simply accept what the Bible teaches. It's that simple. It's very interesting how Professor Erickson expresses the Orthodox belief in an ontological difference between God and man in these terms. He says, God is transcendent. He goes beyond our categories of understanding. He can never fully be grasped within our finite concepts. This is so fascinating how he puts this, because he says, He can never be fully grasped within our finite concepts or by our human vocabulary. He can be understood, but not comprehensively. And correlated with God's transcendence is man's finiteness. He is a limited being in terms of both his point of origin in time and the extent to which he can grasp information. Consequently, he cannot formulate concepts which are commensurate with the nature of God. These limitations are inherent in man's being. They are not a result of the fall or of individual sin, but of the creator-creature relationship. That is the classical Christian theist concept of man and God. And it's absolutely not biblical in any manner, as I'm going to show you. Now, it's obvious, as Hopkins properly notes, that man's finiteness, and we're on a level, of course, in our state of progression right now, that's difficult for man to grasp God. But from the LDS theme and theology, man was not created out of nothing. Mormonism teaches that man is not limited in terms of his point of origin in time. The spirits of men have existed from before the creation of the world as angels, the sons of God, in Job 38:7. And from modern revelation it appears that before their creation as the angelic spirit children of God, men were intelligences. D&C 93:29. Uncreated personalities who have existed from all eternity as the basic kernel of life. That's the LDS theology. In the final say-so, when the scriptures are explored, there is no biblical basis whatever for the claim of classical theism that man and God are ontologically different. And notwithstanding this lack of biblical support, the classical theists have imagined several points in which finite man is limited and is nothing like the Creator at all. And this is so fascinating because the doctrine, it's a little dark on that shot, huh? The doctrine is fundamentally false because their concept of infinity is false. However, notice how the classical Christian theist describes this idea. He summarizes it, Professor Erickson, in his Christian Theology, and I'm going to summarize the idea of finite man as opposed to infinite God, and then we're going to explore the astonishing contrast between the classical Christian concept of man and God with the biblical concept of man and God. Erickson says that man was created means that he has no independent existence. There is nothing necessary about man's existence. Man is a contingent being. He is not an indispensable part of reality. Man is a creature of God, not an outflow from him. Man is not a part of divinity. He has the limitations of finitude. Although the aim of the Christian life is to be spiritually one with God, man will always be metaphysically separate from God. Okay. Man is part of the creation. There is a large metaphysical gap between the span of being. This gap, however, is not between man and the rest of the creatures. It is between God on the one hand and all of the creatures on the other hand. And man is part of the creatures. There's an element which makes man unique, which sets him apart from the rest of the creatures. They are all said to be made according to their kind. He, on the other hand, is described as being made in the image and the likeness of God. There was definite limitations placed upon man. Man is a creature, not God, and has the limitations that go with being finite. Only the Creator is infinite. Man does not and cannot know everything. It is our very finiteness that means that our knowledge will always be incomplete and subject to error. Finiteness also pertains to our lives. Man is not inherently immortal, only God is inherently eternal. All else dies. Finiteness means that there are practical limitations to absolutely all of our accomplishments.